Thank you for your interest in the DSE See and Learn speech programme and for joining me in this presentation. I'm going to first start by talking a little bit about See and Learn. What are the common features and the way we've designed all our See and Learn programmes, and also outline some of the general developmental benefits that I think are linked to all of them. I'm going to say a little bit about how the See and Learn programmes fit together, and then focus in on See and Learn speech, why it's needed, how we've designed it, and how you will use it. Well, what is See and Learn? Well, we've been developing See and Learn practical programmes now for several years in response to requests from parents and teachers. Over the years, we have drawn together research findings, we've run early intervention services ourselves, and we've shared the principles of our approaches in our presentations. But parents and teachers have come back to us and said, be really helpful if we went a step further and actually provided the materials and the teaching programs. So that's what we've done. And at the moment, the See and Learn programs cover language and early reading, speech, memory and number skills. So there are 4 separate programs, and within each of those, there are a number of steps taking children through learning in developmental order. All the See and Learn programs have some common features, so I think it is useful to consider these before moving on to talk directly about See and Learn speech. We take the same approach to designing all our teaching materials. First of all, looking at research. Research into how typical children learn. How do other children learn to talk, to read, to develop clear speech, to count? What research tells us is children with Down syndrome build these skills in the same order. So if we look at how this is happening in typical development, that's our starting point for designing interventions, and then adapting those to take account of what we know about the learning profile for children with Down syndrome. Research in recent years has highlighted a program of strengths and weaknesses, which we can use to adapt teaching to be more effective for the children. We know that children with Down syndrome are going to have a degree of cognitive or learning delays, therefore breaking tasks into small steps, making sure the program has a clear structure, that we build in lots of repetition and practice to consolidate learning. We know that when we start to look at the children's learning, children with Down syndrome have strengths as visual learners. By that we mean their visual learning abilities are better than their ability to learn from just listening. So in terms of building on visual learning strengths, we make sure we use clear pictures and illustrations and print, visual supports for learning. Where it comes to supporting their verbal learning weaknesses, we've made sure we use simple language. All the activities that we engage in encourage children to develop their listening skills, to increase their attention and concentration. And we make sure all our materials are carefully adapted to children's individual needs. In other words, you step through the program at the pace that's appropriate for an individual child. Children can only learn when they build on what they already know. And so we make sure in all the programs it's easy for you to record children's progress and make sure you're working at the right level for that child. In addition, engaging in structured teaching activities and sitting down in one-to-one and small group activities, children learn a lot of behaviours which they use across all learning situations. They learn to listen, as we've said already, to follow directions, to respond to questions. They learn to learn by imitating and copying, by taking turns. They learn to initiate as we take turns. We can initiate, the child joins in. Then the child has a chance to initiate, we join in. They learn to learn through playing with partners. We also try to build into all our activities ways of teaching that support success. We are keen on errorless learning, prompting success in small steps, but then going on, of course, as children learn more, to encourage problem solving, for them to persist and complete a task for themselves and have the pleasure of feeling competent and what might be called mastering tasks and getting the self-reward of just completing them. All the programs provide graded teaching activities in small steps and in a printed kit or an app format. The materials in both are exactly the same, the illustrations are the same, so you could be using the printed kits in classroom and reinforcing that with app activities at home. They all have easy to follow instructions, guides that are the same in all the kit, in either print or app version of the kit, and very importantly, record sheets to chart progress. I've underlined already that keeping a record allows you to make sure you know what the child's learned and you're just teaching the next step. I'll come back to that later. Also, all the kits importantly include suggestions for consolidating and extending learning, or what the teachers listening might think of as generalizing, but extending learning into play activities and everyday activities at home or preschool. We know all children learn through all your interactions with them all day, every day, and those are really important. But we work on the principle that our children are slower learning and they will benefit from a short period every day of structured teaching that gives them that increased opportunity for repetition and practice to consolidate their learning. In other words, we don't think they will progress at the same rate without those periods of relatively intensive instruction each day. We're only talking about 15 or 20 minutes a day, but every day makes a difference. So the See and Learn Speech program is designed to improve speech skills and speech clarity. That's the clarity with which children can actually say words and sentences. It's improving their accuracy of production. The See and Learn Language and Reading program develops language by teaching vocabulary from very first words through to joining words together in sentences and learning the grammar, and then to improving children's ability to talk and join in conversations. It also includes activities to develop early reading skills for preschoolers. See and Learn Number is designed to teach the basics of counting and the first steps that children have to understand the number system. See and Learn Memory is designed to improve children's memory. Now, children are doing all these things alongside each other in their early years. They're both learning to talk, improving their speech clarity, learning to count, improving their memory. So we will be encouraging you to use activities from each of these programs alongside each other for short periods every day. So let's turn then to concentrate and focus in on the See and Learn Speech program. This program is designed to improve children's speech perception and speech production. And by that I mean their ability to hear and discriminate all speech sounds, and then to produce those sounds and combine them into words and sentences. And the starting point, of course, is you need to be able to hear all the different sounds before you can begin to produce them. The program is designed for children from babies into school years, and I'll explain that a little bit more in a moment. When we say babies, all our programs start with teaching things from the beginning. Okay, we've tried to design these early intervention programs by focusing in on the first developmental steps in each area and developing materials to encourage development from that stage. Now, before we move on into discussing the program, I really want to make sure that everyone understands the difference between speech work and language work, because we are constantly being asked this question and it's clear that very often people are confused. So I just want to stress the difference between language and speech. When children are learning to talk, they have to crack the code. They have to understand the meanings of words, so what dog, cat, crying, mummy, car, sleep mean. Okay, so they have to build up a large vocabulary uh, where they're learning to understand the words and say the words in communication. And they also have to learn the rules of grammar and the way which we put words together to build sentences. Now that is language learning, okay? That's the language part. And what we see, of course, is children may understand quite a bit and want to communicate, but they don't have clear speech. So once you understand words and you know what you want to say, you still have to be able to produce those words clearly, and that's a speech motor exercise. So what this program is focusing in on is the speech, how to help children to say words clearly, and the See and Learn language and reading program focuses on that language part, teaching vocabulary, teaching sentences. Why do we need to focus in on speech? Because the speech of children and adults is often very difficult to understand. Research by people like Libby Cooman in the States has shown that parents report almost every young person with Down syndrome has some speech difficulty. In other words, they aren't able to speak as clearly as most of us take for granted. And that for approximately 6 out of 10, they're often not understood by people who are not familiar with them. And that is a considerable, that has a considerable impact on their ability to make friends, to communicate in school, to communicate in the community. So I hope I've made that clear. This program is focusing on helping children to say words clearly. Okay? It's about the speech, clarity, articulation, and phonology. Okay. Now, speech skills matter. And although I've stressed that they matter because we want children to speak clearly, there's more to it than that. If you think about learning to talk and cracking the code, in order to understand words, you need to be able to hear all the speech sounds and discriminate between them. I've used the example already of rhyming words like hat, mat, cat, sat, bat. They all have completely different meanings. And if the child can't actually hear those initial sounds and hear the difference between h and k, then they're not going to be able to learn to understand those words. So being able to hear and discriminate all the sounds matters for learning to understand words, for the language learning. And then, of course, it matters to be able to make the sounds to talk. And research shows that children's babble is speech practice. Children babble the sounds they hear in the language around them. Research shows also that by 8-9 months of age, in typical development, the sounds that babies babble predict the first words they will say. The sounds they can make predict words they will try and predict how fast they learn to say words. Okay, so speech and speech discrimination matter. It's also the case that speech development starts very early. Research has shown that children can hear and discriminate speech sounds from the earliest weeks of life. And these studies show that children can hear the sounds in any language at 4 and 5 weeks of age. But by 12 months of age, they're not so good at discriminating sounds in Chinese, Japanese, Russian, if they French, Italian, if actually what they've been listening to is English. So by 12 months of age, they've really tuned into their native language, the one they need to listen to learn to talk. Now they'll be better at discriminating the sounds in their own language and not so good at others. So we can see the brain is tuning very carefully for this good discrimination of the language that the child is learning. It's also, so it's very important. We know that's going on in the first year of life. So we encourage people to start this speech work with babies by 6 months of age. That doesn't mean also you can't pick it up later, and we'll come back to that. But if we're going through this in developmental order, and if we want to help children get as far as possible, I've said already, our thinking is okay, where is this, what are the earliest steps that we see in the development of this skill? And the earliest steps we see for children building up the ability to hear and say speech sounds start in the first weeks of life. So we want to be encouraging listening and speech discrimination early in our babies, especially as many of them will have degrees of hearing loss, okay? The other thing stressed by Carol Stahl-Gammon, who's one of the experts on speech development in children with Down syndrome, is that it's a motor skill. It's influenced by practice and feedback. Babies babble, they listen, they hear their own speech. It's influenced by practice, okay, and input and feedback from those around them. We know that children with Down syndrome are going to be affected by high incidence of conductive hearing loss right from the first year of life. If you've got glue in your ear, you will not hear clearly, but you may hear more clearly if we engage in specific activities to help you. We know there are differences in anatomy and physiology that may influence their ability to produce clear speech. But we also know it's not just that. The children can imitate sounds and words more clearly when they've just heard them than if they're doing it spontaneously. And what I mean by that is a study by Barbara Dodd many years ago showed that she recorded children with Down syndrome naming pictures. So they were drawing on their own spontaneously stored language, and they went through a list of pictures saying apple, bear, cat, early words. So they looked at the picture, said the word. She then repeated the exercise where she said the word first, and then they copied it. When they copied her, they spoke more clearly. So that means it can't all be to do with mouth, tongue, muscles, and so on. It is suggesting they don't always store really accurate sound patterns to guide their production. We'll come to that again. We also know they have verbal short-term memory difficulties. That is listening. It is difficulties in processing and storing language. Okay. And we know, of course, as I've said already, that they tend to have difficulties producing clear speech patterns, for which the technical term is the phonology. And it may be linked with general delays in motor development, although I think speech motor skills are specific to speech. Okay. I've mentioned verbal short-term memory already, and here's just a little bit more information. In working memory, we have a verbal short-term store and a visual short-term store. In the verbal short-term store, we have something called a phonological loop. It's argued by the experts that this is developed as a language acquisition device to hold the sound pattern of words while we link them to meaning as we're learning language, to hold the sound pattern so it can get into storage in the brain, into long-term memory, okay, along with its meaning. We know from the work of Chris Jarrell and colleagues at Bristol that children with Down syndrome, even as teenagers, are poor at learning the detailed phonological forms of words. So my examples where words may only vary by a single sound, Chris Jarrell and colleagues have shown that children with Down syndrome find that difficult, okay, and they may not learn accurately specified phonological patterns and store them. Separately, looking at children's development, children who are typically developing, speech sound development influences the development of that phonological working memory. And that's what we would expect. For your verbal short-term memory to work well, you've got to have good discrimination for speech sounds and words, so you can recognize and hold them accurately. So if we can improve speech perception and speech production, it is possible it will also improve that verbal short-term memory issue. Okay. What do we know about effective interventions for speech work? Well, there are not a lot. I'm talking now specifically about youngsters with Down syndrome. There are a few small studies, all with positive results, produced by a study in Ireland and then studies by Barbara Dodd and colleagues. These studies are similar, okay, and they all showed positive change when people just focused in on improving sound production and word production. Barbara Dodd has gone on to develop something called a core vocabulary approach, and we've drawn on her work to design our activities. But in these earlier studies, the Irish one and Barbara's work in Australia, Both worked on sound production and word production with input and repetitive practice. They identified sounds and words for the particular children that they needed to work on. Parents did the practice work at home. There was evidence that improved ability to produce sounds and word patterns led to an increase in length of utterance, the number of words and word endings a child could produce. And that was from the Irish study. The Irish study also showed that this practice moved children on developmentally. All children have immature phonology and make phonological errors at the start. The Irish study showed that this intensive work with 4 to 6-year-olds, I think it was from memory, improved with practice at home. There's more detail and references to this work on the See and Learn speech area of the See and Learn website, on our website. More recently, Anne van Bisterveld in New Zealand linked the teaching of letter sounds of phonological awareness to speech sounds, and all 10 children showed speech sound improvement. Now, that was coming at it rather as you might think about teaching letter sounds for reading, linking a sound to the letter representation, and getting children to listen to sounds in words, the kind of work that's done to lead into reading. And did that and shown that with the sounds that she targeted, the children's speech sound production improved. And in all these studies, the intervention was delivered by parents. So it's not a huge database, but it is encouraging. So in a little bit more detail, See and Learn speech is small steps towards that clearer speech perception and production. And those steps include becoming familiar with the speech sounds and storing those in your memory, discriminating between speech sounds. So you may be able to store them, but can you hear the difference between those who are quite similar, the sounds that are quite similar? And that matters, okay? We need to be able to hear the difference between hat, mat, cat, sat. Words that only vary by a single sound. Then there's activities to encourage the child to produce speech sounds. First of all, individual sounds, and then simple combinations of vowels and consonants. Moving on to saying whole words. And all children go through these steps. They babble and copy single sounds. They start to put sounds together, and then they attempt words, okay? And we start practicing words with words that begin with a particular sound that the child can make. We're building all the time, therefore, on what the child can do. And then we're working on to saying more complex words that have 2 and 3 syllables in, and putting words together. All children, as they start to talk, get to say, first of all, their attempts at early words are usually only understood by their mum and dad, and that's all children. Their first attempts at words are not clear. They then begin to move on to produce words that are recognisable to everybody. But as children start to produce single words fairly clearly, when they move on to start to put 2 and 3 words together, the clarity of those individual words deteriorates. So practice is needed for all children as they develop clearer spoken language, and we're working at each of those steps for children with Down syndrome and similar speech difficulties. Now, to link those steps in speech development with the actual kits in See and Learn speech, they go through through the steps in the same order. So playing with sounds is focusing on listening to, hearing, discriminating and producing single sounds. Putting sounds together is, as it suggests, it's putting 2 sounds together, a consonant and a vowel. And then we move into saying words, saying more words, saying later words. We are now practicing whole words, and we're selecting those based on the sounds that a child can make. So saying words is practicing words that start with the sounds that are usually mastered earliest in development, and I'll detail those later. Saying more words is words starting with slightly more difficult sounds. Saying later words starting with sounds that are usually the last ones to be mastered. Then moving on to saying longer words. Saying words and more words are mostly single syllable words, and then some 2 syllable words in the later words. When we get to longer words and phrases, we're looking at 2, 3, 4 syllable words and joining words together. We've also had requests from therapists to speed up putting out a step that focuses on word endings, children practicing specific word endings. I do want to say at this point that we choose the content carefully. I've already highlighted, we've selected words to practice, choosing initial sounds that we expect the child to get first. In other words, we're working with sounds in developmental order. All our vocabulary examples are taken from early vocabulary, words we expect the children to be learning and understanding. So we're careful about selecting the content and examples in all our materials. We have now started to produce app versions for all our kits. The first apps are usually iPad versions, and we're trying to follow them with the Android and Windows versions as quickly as we can, but it does take time to do these things well. The apps have the same content as the printed kit. They take you through the same steps and the same activities with the same guide, same record sheets, so they can be used together. And it's important to stress all our kits come with a guide, which takes you step by step through exactly how to carry out the activities. So we've tried to provide very easy guidance. We've given clear instructions on what you should say and how you should deliver the teaching. You also have record sheets to record the child's progress, and that's important. And those record sheets also will help you to decide what the next things to teach are and how to move through the activities. And of course the kits, printed kits and the apps can be used together, as I've said already. And this slide just illustrates the kinds of guides and record sheets that we include in all our programs. The guides have an introductory section about the design of the program and our thinking and references to research. But when we get to the step-by-step instructions, they are very clear, telling you exactly what to do and exactly what to say, so that we keep the instructions consistent and simple and as effective as possible for the child. And the guides have both instructions for using the card versions, the printed kits and the apps in the same guide, so you can see how they work together. We have record sheets for each program, and these are really important. The columns in the sheets will link to the activities and stepping through, and I'll come back to that when we get to each step, and I'll describe what you do. But that example on this slide is an example from one of the Saying Words programs. I think it's the Saying More Words. And you will see, we're grading the child's progress, could say part of the word, said the word recognisably, said the whole word clearly. And we have clear criteria in the guide for making those assessments. See and Learn Playing with Sounds then is the first step in See and Learn Speech. And we've said already, it focuses on developing children's ability to hear all the speech sounds, phonemes, and to practice listening to them, identify the difference and producing them. And we can start from 6 months of age. And on the app screen at the side of this slide, you can see there are 4 activities, and there we'll develop those on the next slide. Right, so Playing with Sounds has 4 activities, and I'll just tell you a little bit more about each activity. Listening to, excuse me, listening to single sounds. The attention there is the child just sits and listens, as you can see in that picture. That they're hearing all the sounds and they're getting the opportunity to hear separate sounds for a short practice time every day when they're sitting in the high chair, sitting in the bath, whenever it works for you. So they're hearing those single sounds, and we're not just relying on them being able to hear sounds within words as you talk to them. We're also beginning to teach them to link the sound to a picture card. This is paired associate learning. We have a picture representation for each sound. The reason for teaching them to link them to a picture card is it enables us to test their discrimination. So when you get to the third activity, selecting different sounds, we're going to show the child 2 cards and say, can you show me t? Can you show me s? So now the child can point to the correct card illustrating t or illustrating s from a choice. And you will find the children can do that. They can show you, they can hear the sounds and hear the differences between the sounds before they can actually make the sounds. So by teaching them to link them with a picture card, we can test their listening and discrimination and learning before they can make the spoken sounds. Now, activity 2, so listening to different sounds, we've put in particularly to give the very young children the opportunity to start listening to sounds that are compared. So again, 2 sounds, 2 cards and 2 sounds. But at this point, we're not testing their discrimination. They can choose either card. But we are giving the opportunity for the very little ones to learn to point and to learn to choose. Because if we're starting with the babies, they may not yet be pointing. They may not yet be able to point to a card or point to the computer screen, ready for activity 3, which is selecting different sounds. I've explained activity 3. You're going to give the child a choice. They have to identify the card that represents the sound. And then, of course, the final issue is we want them to be able to say all these sounds. They will start to copy a number of these sounds while you're doing the earlier activities. But the 4th activity is to go through and actually assess their ability to say the sound when they see the card, and for you to have a list of the sounds they are beginning to master. And I've said already, they won't get them all at once. There are sounds that are easier. B, d are easier sounds, for example. And again, Carol Stoll-Gammon has written and assessed the information that shows in the first vocabulary that most children learn, a lot of those words are the words that start with easier sounds. There is a pattern to this for all children. So we're going to move through, we're going to be keeping a record of the sounds your child can hear and discriminate and the sounds they can say. And once they can say some sounds and are, once they can say some sounds, consonant and vowel sounds, we're going to move into putting sounds together. And we may move on with the sounds that they've got, even though there is still a lot more sounds they need to learn. So you could still be using playing with sounds to work on the sounds they haven't yet got, but moving on to put sounds together using the sounds they can make. And here we have some examples. The orange examples are examples of record sheets that go with playing with sounds. And you will see our record sheets with clear instructions, tell you how to record what's happening, keep space for observations. Where that first record sheet talks about card sets 1, 2 and 3, we've arranged the cards into sets so that it's slightly easier to work with them, because I think there's 42 sound cards in the set and we've broken them up into 3 sets of 14, and each set includes consonants and vowels. That helps you to keep track of which set you've worked through at a time. When we move on to selecting the different sounds, that's activity 3. We've got on the record sheet sounds that are easier to discriminate, and you can choose those in the app, and in the cards it tells you which are sounds that are easier to discriminate because there's a bigger contrast, and then the sounds that are more difficult to discriminate because they're closer to each other, that's those later sounds. Once your child can do that, you can put them into a random order if you wish. So it gives you some examples that there's there's a lot to be thought about, and we've thought carefully about also how to record children's progress. If you look at the green record sheet, that is for combining consonants and vowels, which is the next kit we're going to talk about. I just want to draw your attention to the fact that we have two columns here. Can the child combine them in imitation? So can they copy bar when you've just said bar? And that's a really, really important step. When they can imitate the sound, that's a really important step. But we're only quite sure they've really consolidated and stored that information in their long-term memory when they can do it independently, when you can show them the picture and of the sheep and they can say bar. You haven't had to say it first. Okay. So these are steps. So we want to record the stage at which they're able to imitate, the stage at which they're able to produce this combination independently. And you'll see that that applies to all our spoken output activities, whether it's words, sounds. We want to record when the child can imitate the word, but also when they can use it spontaneously. So it's step by step. It's recording progress in carefully graded steps and drawing your attention to the stage the child's got to in their learning. I'm now going to show you some video clips. One of the things I've not said so far is how important it is for children to be able to see your face, your lip movements and mouth shapes when they are learning sounds and learning to talk. All children intently watch faces, and the view is they are learning about how to make sounds from watching how you make sounds and produce words. And the first clip shows how intently a baby can concentrate on the face of the speaker even at a few months of age. Importantly, this links to the fact that in all our speech work, we really do encourage you to produce the sounds and say the words yourself, and have the child able to look at your face as well as the picture. And there are several reasons for this. Not only that children use these speech reading cues, but also everybody has their own local dialects and their own way of producing sounds, and we want the baby to be learning how sounds are made in the way you talk in your community. So the apps do have sound recordings on, but we do advise you not to use them. You can use them with children for practice later, but it really is important that babies see your face, they look and listen. The second clip shows an older child listening to a speech sound and learning to link it to the picture. I've mentioned already we teach the picture cue, and you can then you can see that happening, and that cue is to allow us to test their discrimination. You also notice he is also looking up at the speaker's face to see how the sound's made. Now, these clips and the later ones in this presentation are not illustrating our latest See and Learn cards and See and Learn materials. They're clips we took in our early intervention service, showing the same activities but using materials we had as prototypes before we developed the See and Learn materials to a much higher standard.
Anything else? Ooh. Ooh, you did, you found it. Ooh. 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 Good boy, you're doing it. Ooh, good boy, you're doing it. Ooh. That was lovely. Oh, yes, and you get a finger as a treat. Oh, put my fingers in my mouth for a treat. Ooh. That was nice. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. Yes. Oh, that's nice. We know that one don't we? Yeah. He says ba, 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 ba. Well done, you found my face. Ba, 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 ba. That's a good sound. He goes ba, 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 ba. Yeah, have a good look. That's lovely. Shall we have a look? He goes ba, 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 ba. I like it. Ba, 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 ba. Ba, 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 ba. That's a good sound. Ba, ba, ba. What a lovely sound. Ba, 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 ba. That's nice. Oh, nice. Yes. Ba, 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 ba. That's nice, isn't it? Ba, 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 ba. Ba, 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 ba. What a lovely sound. Shall we try a different one?
So the second step in See and Learn speech is putting sounds together and helping children to put consonants and vowel sounds. It builds on the skills taught in playing with sounds. You move on working with the sounds the child can make, and it is suitable to start practicing with children who can babble, because in babble children start to put sounds together and say ba 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 ba, dad 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 dad. So in babble they start to combine sounds. And one of the things that's important to do is, when your child is using their voice, when they're babbling, is to repeat the sounds back and also encourage different sounds, and again with that face-to-face activity so they can see what you're doing. So in putting sounds together there are two activities. One is combining consonants and vowels for words that we've identified, like key and p, and there are not a huge number of actual words that are only a two-sound words, and we've pulled out the ones that are early words for children. So combining consonants and vowels, and then the other activity is the symbolic sounds like moo and bar, which are also, of course, two sounds together. So picture prompts to practice this combining sounds. The third step in See and Learn speech is saying words, and this is aiming to help children improve production of words they're already now wanting to say and starting to use. So we have 8 sets of 1 or 2 syllable words, and I think there's 8 cards. There's 8 examples for each, so there's 8 b words, 8 d words. The words are chosen to be early vocabulary, early words we're expecting children to attempt. So once your child is attempting a b for ball or k for cup, then we are going to start encouraging them to practice to get that production clearer. I should stress, we do not want you to correct your child or ask your child to repeat words in ordinary communication. If they're talking to you and wanting to communicate, you should understand their communication. You can repeat the word back clearly, but you don't press them to repeat. These speech activities are for practice once a day, 15 minutes a day, as a separate game. Okay, so we're going to practice getting words clearer as a game. Obviously, this builds on the skills in playing with sounds and putting sounds together, and you're going to work forward based on initial sounds your child can make. So if they're attempting words that start with b, you're going to work at b words. If they're attempting words that start with m or p. So you're going to move forward again on the basis of your own child's progress which sets of words you work at are determined by the sounds your child can make. And this is because I think I might have said earlier that research shows that the sounds children babble, the sounds children do start to produce in babble do predict the first words they will try. So if they are babbling bar, 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 it is likely they will try words that start with a B. So there is a progression to this, demonstrated by researchers like Carol Stoll-Gammon. So we want you to work forward practicing words we think your child is ready to be able to say more clearly, at least from the initial sounds onwards. And this slide just illustrates the point I think I've made earlier, that the picture materials have very clear representations. We've tried hard to get clear, accurate, real photograph representations for words, both in our speech work and in our language work, and exactly the same illustrations are in the printed kits as on the cards, as on the apps. There are 3 activities in saying words, and you're going to move through them as the child is able to produce each word more clearly. So to start with, saying words, it's encouraging first attempts, and the child may be making a recognisable attempt. You always know that what they're attempting to say is ball, but it may only be b. So first attempts we want to practice and encourage. Then we're going to move on to trying to get more complete word production with all the sounds in the words. Again, it still may not be very clear, but when we've reached that criterion, we're going to move on to more repeated multiple repetitions. These steps are based on Barbara Dodd's core vocabulary approach. Her work has suggested that children with Down syndrome have inconsistent production. They may, when you record them producing words and producing sentences, they say words differently on different occasions. And for children with inconsistent speech production, she recommends this core vocabulary approach, which does work to intensive practice of their of words to try and get them to their best production level. There are clear criteria for moving on through each step, and again you will move with specific words. You will choose which words you are working on in the learning to say words, which words have now progressed to a stage where we're going to move into the practicing activities, and then which words have reached a stage where we're going to move into the rehearsing activities with those words. So again, the steps, what your child is doing is based on your child's progress. The next 2 video clips show children being encouraged to practice words that start with sounds they can say. You will see the first child shows he understands and consigns the words his mum's presenting, and he's now being gently encouraged to try to say them and to repeat the sound patterns with his mum. The second child is older and can quite confidently say most of these words. But note, it is important to give him time. Children with Down syndrome take a bit longer to process information, produce a response. So it's important to give them enough time before prompting.
What's this? Banana. You can sign banana. Good boy, banana. Banana, good boy. Turn over, what's this? What is it? Ball. Good boy, ball. Say ball. Ball. Turn over. What's that one? Bird. Bird. That's butterfly. Bird. Bird. Good boy. Nice try. Boat. Good boy. Boat. Boat. What is it? Boat. Yeah. Boat. Boy. What's this one? What's that? What is it? Good boy. That's a nice one. Bubbles. What's that one? Say it. Balloon. 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 Look. Mummy, turn it.
Yeah. Who's that?
Dog.
Dog.
Good boy.
Here it goes. Dog.
Quack, quack. Door.
A door.
Good boy. That's it, very good. Dirty.
Ooh, what's that?
Dog.
Dog.
Good boy. Turn the page.
Turn the page, yeah.
Next.
It's
Dinner. Dinner.
And that is the girl going down the slide.
See and Learn Saying More Words is the fourth step in See and Learn Speech. It works like saying words. It's designed to improve accuracy of word production. Now we have sets of words that start with more difficult sounds, and those are listed at the bottom of the slide, but you're going to go through the same activities. Different set of words, different sound patterns to practice, and you're going to do this based on starting when your child actually is attempting words that start with a t or a g or a ch. In exactly the same way as I've already described, the words you practice will depend on your own child's sound production and the words they're attempting to say. See and Learn Saying Words is then the fifth step in See and Learn Speech, and works in exactly the same way as saying words and saying more words, but again with words starting with the more difficult sounds, the ones that many children don't get till they're quite a bit older, or can't produce accurately till they're quite a bit older. So we're working through in order of difficulty. This slide just illustrates some of the words used in saying later words. Highlights, we've tried hard to get what we think are good representations in terms of pictures, but it's also important to say that by this stage, children perhaps working at improving production of words with these sorts of sounds in may well be reading. So we do have the printed words on the cards in the saying words, saying more words, saying later words sets, because for any child who can read, that is going to help them identify the sounds in words and how words should be said. The next video clip shows children working with a speech and language therapist in one of our early intervention group sessions. Now, for many years we ran an early intervention service, and we did this with group sessions. The children might come once a fortnight or even once a month for group sessions, and we modelled things that we encourage parents then to continue to practice at home. There are some advantages to group sessions in that the children learn from each other. They take turns, some of the pressure's taken off them, and other children can model what they need to do. But of course it also means children need to learn to wait and take turns, so it can be quite helpful in getting them ready to go to school, where they are going to be taught in groups and they do need to be able to sit and listen and wait their turn. It may be important to note that these children, who are now roughly 4 years old, have been doing speech sound activities for several years, and they're now learning to listen to the first sounds in words and to discriminate between the words, between the sounds and sh, as you'll see in the video. And of course, this speech work leads on to setting them up for being able to do the letter sound work for reading. And these children will be going into school in the next school year.
Oh, what's that?
The food.
What? Yes. Oh, lovely talking. Good boy. Ready? Which one is it? Shoes. What can you hear? choose. Can you put it in the box? Good boy, very, very good. You drop it in there. Yay!
I've already explained that if we're starting with babies, we would start work on this See and Learn speech program from as early as 6 months of age, because this is the stage babies are listening to the language and learning the sounds and the sound patterns. However, many older children still need to build the same skills. They're still not producing clear, recognizable words. But an older child who's already talking, you can listen to their spoken language, note down the words and word patterns where they're having difficulty. And then when you can see which words they have difficulty with, but which words they have the starting sounds for, you can identify whether they're ready to work on saying words, saying more words, or saying later words. However, we would also encourage you to check they can hear and discriminate all individual speech sounds, because if they can't actually hear all the sounds, discriminate the differences, and also produce the single sounds, then this may be where their difficulty lies. If they are slightly older, of course, you can, and they've learnt to link sounds to letters, you can use letter cards to test their ability to hear and discriminate sounds. And you can also use their reading ability to help them improve their production. We said at the start of this presentation that we moved into developing materials and detailed step-by-step teaching programs because parents and teachers and therapists suggested they would be helpful. If your child has a speech and language therapist, obviously we hope they will encourage you to use these materials and support you in telling you at what stage your child has reached and what sounds and words are appropriate. And this will be very helpful. However, we know that most children with Down syndrome live in parts of the world where there is limited access to any kind of speech and language therapy or expert advice. And we have therefore designed all our programs so that we hope there's enough information for parents, carers, nursery nurses, preschool staff, classroom staff to use these materials to work every day in small steps to support children's development. I hope I've explained the See and Learn speech program sufficiently for you to feel confident about what it aims to do, and also to understand perhaps the step that your child has got to. But if you want more information, there's a lot more information about each program on the See and Learn website, with references to the research that we've used as the evidence base to design the programs. And you can keep in touch with us by joining our See and Learn Facebook group, and that is a really good way to post questions and to get further support from us. We do have limited resources, we do try to answer queries, but if you have queries and concerns and you post them to the Facebook group and we answer them there, it's likely other people will have similar queries and will benefit from that information sharing. Finally, this slide is just a reminder of some of the key features of both printed programs and apps. And the following slide gives you the links to go to our shop to purchase materials. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you for your interest in improving speech clarity and intelligibility for children with Down syndrome.